The jungle pressed in around Corin Hale like a living, breathing creature, thick with humidity and heavy with the scent of damp soil and resin. Hidden beneath his ghillie suit, he lay still on the forest floor, attuned to every shift of air and rustle of leaf. His heartbeat stayed slow, controlled, practiced. The M24 rifle rested securely in his hands, its cold metal familiar, its wooden stock worn smooth where his cheek had pressed against it countless times. In an age where armies boasted plasma lances and particle-shredding carbines, his weapon seemed an artifact, at least to those who had never seen what a human sniper could do with one. Hale hadn't asked to be the last man from his unit, but survival often had more to do with habit than heroism. He'd grown up on ranges back on Earth, raised by a father who believed precision was a form of discipline. When the Galactic Concord expanded its influence and Earth volunteered soldiers to prove themselves trustworthy allies, Hale had joined willingly. He'd imagined cooperation, shared strength, and mutual respect. The reality had been far less dignified. Humans were newcomers, and their technology lagged centuries behind the Concords. Even the most polite alien commanders joked about primitive combustion weapons, making theatrically nervous faces whenever Hale entered a briefing room carrying his rifle. He remembered those sneers now as he waited in the shadowed thicket. He'd kept the M24 out of stubbornness, but also out of trust. Trust in what he knew, trust in physics, trust in the invisible math that lived between distance and impact. Some new recruits thought the weapon was sentimental, a charm of sorts. It wasn't. It was practical. When the ambush weeks ago triggered a cascading EMP from a collapsing Starcore reactor, every energy-based weapon in the Joint Task Force had gone dead. Hale's rifle hadn't even blinked. He scanned the clearing through his scope. The alien patrol he'd been tracking for the last hour had paused near a cluster of wide-leaf plants that glistened with moisture. 3 figures, one tall and armor-plated, another wiry with translucent skin, a third hovering slightly above the ground with a faint hum, stood in a loose triangle. They carried gleaming weapons that hummed with dormant power, unaware of how vulnerable they were. Their chatter drifted to him in clipped clicks, chimes, and translated whispers. Even without hearing every word, he recognized the tone. They were mocking someone, mocking something, probably him. He adjusted his rifle a fraction of an inch, more habit than necessity. The aliens believed they were hunting a relic, a lone human armed with outdated equipment whose presence in the jungle was more of an insult than a threat. Yet Hale had already mapped their movement patterns, noted the blind angles in their sensor sweeps, and analyzed how the floating drone's vibration disrupted its own readings. He didn't need superior technology. He needed timing, positioning, and calm. A distant rumble echoed overhead, signaling the patrol's reinforcement shuttle passing far above the canopy. They were tightening their net. Good. That meant they still believed he was running. Hunting works best when the prey behaves as expected. Hale exhaled slowly, letting the breath leave him without sound. The jungle noises folded around him, buzzing insects, creaking branches, distant calls of unseen creatures. The last rays of fading light filtered through the leaves, tinting the patrol in muted gold. He wasn't eager to kill, but he understood necessity. If he didn't act, they'd locate the remaining survivors from the crashed transport and execute them. He was the only barrier between them and slaughter. He steadied his aim, the world narrowing into a perfect alignment of crosshairs and arrogance. "Let's begin," he whispered to the quiet earth. His finger tightened on the trigger, and the story truly started. The rifle's recoil was gentle, almost courteous, and Hale used the motion to sink deeper into the sheltering foliage. Across the clearing, the floating alien drone lurched as the round punched through its stabilizer ring. It faltered midair, sputtering with a metallic whine before spiraling downward and smashing into the armored soldier beneath it. The crash echoed through the trees, sharp and unmistakable. Hale was already sliding backward on his elbows, vanishing into the undergrowth while the patrol erupted into frenetic shouting. The translucent-skinned alien whipped its head from side to side, its eyes flaring violet as it tried to locate the source of the attack. Its scanner emitted a rising hum, but the device searched for thermal spikes and energy trails, signatures Hale had deliberately avoided producing. A ballistic round left neither. To the alien's instruments, the killing shot had come from nowhere. The armored reptilian roared in pain and fury, wrenching the shattered drone off its shoulder. The creature's thick plates flexed as it tried to stand, only to collapse again when the severed stabilizer embedded in its joint tore deeper. Hale heard its frustrated growl fading behind him as he moved, each motion slow and controlled to avoid shaking the brush. He knew better than to linger. The first shot always brought confusion, but the second had to be taken from a new angle. Predictability was death. He circled the patrol's perimeter, counting his breaths to steady the rising tension. The air felt heavier now, thick with charge panic. The translucent alien was babbling into its comm link, switching between languages in desperation. Hale couldn't understand most of it, but one translated fragment reached him with clarity. Invisible weapon. No plasma signature. That was enough. They still thought in terms of energy warfare. They couldn't imagine a threat that obeyed older rules. He settled behind a fallen trunk softened by decay and raised the rifle. Through the scope, he watched the reptilian attempt to pivot, its massive frame trembling. Hale noted the injured joint, the angle of its spine, the exposed gap between overlapping armor. A single breath, a single squeeze, another muted shot cracked through the jungle, and the alien collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. The translucent scout shrieked and scrambled behind a tree, pressing itself against the bark as if it expected the wood to shield it from physics. It triggered a defensive field, a shimmering dome that distorted the air around it. Hale recognized the bubble design. It was calibrated to refract plasma, not stop metal. He adjusted for distance, wind, and the faint oscillation of the shield surface. The bullet slipped through the shimmering barrier as if the field were decorative glass. The alien dropped silently. For a moment, the clearing fell into a hush, so complete it felt sacrilegious. Even the insects paused. Hale listened for any remaining movement, but the patrol was finished. 3 bodies lay scattered amid trampled foliage and smoking drone fragments. He didn't savor the victory. He only evaluated it. The Concord's soldiers were skilled, disciplined, and technologically superior, but they were predictable. Their arrogance acted like a blindfold. Hale merely took advantage of the darkness it created. He scanned the treetops, noticing the faint displacement of air above the canopy. Reinforcements. That shuttle he'd heard earlier was circling back, likely responding to the abrupt loss of contact from the patrol. He wiped a fleck of dirt from his cheek and rose to a low crouch, the rifle snug against his torso. He had no illusions about the scale of the threat descending on him, yet the pressure sharpened him rather than weighed him down. Lesson 1, he murmured to himself as he slipped deeper into the forest. Never assume the old ways are obsolete. The jungle swallowed him whole once more, and above the trees, the enemy descended unaware of the education awaiting them. The reinforcements descended with a precision that betrayed their confidence. Hale heard them before he saw them, the low thrum of grav discs vibrating through the canopy like a warning pulse. He pressed himself against the trunk of a wide, buttressed tree, letting its ridged surface absorb his outline. The jungle dimmed as several figures dropped through the foliage, landing with silent, practiced control. These were not patrol grunts. Their movements were deliberate, measured, and purposeful, predators rather than guards. Hale studied them with the same scrutiny they employed on the world around them. Each wore a sleek suit woven with adaptive camouflage that shifted hues to mimic the surrounding greenery, and their weapons radiated faint oscillations of contained force. These were specialists sent to end an embarrassment before it spiraled. Hale understood the shift instantly. Moments like this separated seasoned soldiers from fools. When the enemy stopped underestimating you, the real hunt began. He allowed himself one slow breath, then began measuring the distance to the nearby ridgeline. The specialists fanned out in a tight formation, scanning for heat trails and disruptive EM signatures. As expected, their systems leaned on advanced detection algorithms. Algorithms vulnerable to the oldest tricks in the book. Hale reached into a side pouch, retrieved 2 small strips of reflective foil scavenged from a downed reconnaissance drone, and stuck one to a low-hanging vine before tossing the other into a patch of sunlit brush. Within seconds, 2 specialists swerved toward the false readings, splitting their formation just enough to create an exploitable seam. Hale slipped along the ground, using roots for cover. His ghillie suit gathered leaves, mud, and clinging debris that blurred him further. Every movement felt like threading a needle. When he reached a vantage point overlooking the fractured formation, he raised the M24 and adjusted his scope. One specialist crouched beside a strange device, a palm-sized orb that pulsed with violet light, while another swept the area with a handheld scanner. Their composure hinted at countless successful missions. Professionals, Hale thought, which meant they expected another professional in return. He lined up his shot carefully. The scanner-carrying specialist paused, tilting its head as if sensing something intangible. Hale steadied his breathing, waiting for the slight twitch of its shoulder that signaled hesitation. When it came, he squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the humid air, and the specialist toppled before its scanner even registered the incoming round. Hale cycled the bolt with practiced speed, shifting angles to avoid detection. The second shot punched through the orb device, detonating it in a blossom of violet sparks that lit the nearby leaves and sent the crouched alien sprawling. The remaining specialists responded instantly. They dove behind cover and activated their cloaking fields, becoming shimmers of distortion against the dense foliage. Hale knew better than to fire again without relocating. Even without a ballistic trail to trace, they could triangulate the sound. He slipped away from his perch, counting on their assumption that he would retreat downhill. Instead, he angled upward, climbing the ridge with slow, calculated movements. The higher elevation afforded him new sight lines and forced the specialist to fight against the slope. As he reached the crest, he glanced back through a break in the leaves. 2 specialists were advancing cautiously, their cloaks flickering from the strain of rapid movement. Another trailed behind them, communicating updates to unseen commanders. Hale raised his rifle again, but instead of firing, he observed. Their discipline told him something important. They weren't just trying to eliminate him. They wanted to study him. Each movement they made confirmed it. They were gathering data on ballistic behavior, reaction timing, and human fieldcraft. They were adapting. Hale wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. This was the real threat. Not their weapons, but their capacity to learn. He could win skirmishes, but a war of adaptation required something more. He needed to plant doubt deep enough that it disrupted their logic. He drew a careful breath and whispered to the wind, "Lesson 2 isn't about bullets." Then he turned toward the inner ridge, crafting a plan that would change the battlefield entirely. Hale moved along the ridgeline with a steady, deliberate rhythm, aware that every second tightened the net around him. The specialists below had adjusted their formation again, but he no longer cared about the precise configuration of their hunt. His goal had shifted. He needed to reach the abandoned outpost buried deeper in the jungle. A small installation the Concord had erected months earlier before deeming the region strategically insignificant. Hale had scouted it during previous patrols. Its power core, though dysfunctional for advanced weaponry, still contained volatile charge. More importantly, the surrounding terrain narrowed into a natural funnel carved by time and rain. A bottleneck, a place where numbers lost their advantage, a place where a patient marksman could teach a final lesson. He descended the slope with near-silent precision. Every branch he touched, every step he placed, was an exercise in discipline. A sloppy retreat would give the specialists the patterns they needed. He reached the jungle floor and skirted a curtain of tangled vines, ducking beneath them as the canopy thickened, turning the path ahead into a dim corridor. A faint pulse of blue light flickered in the distance, the outpost's failing beacon. The sight stirred a memory of the last conversation he had with Captain Vance before the ambush. A reminder that survival sometimes meant knowing exactly when to stop running. Hale hadn't understood the remark then. He did now. The outpost's entrance yawned before him, half swallowed by creeping vegetation. He slipped inside and paused to let his eyes adjust to the mossy gloom. Metal crates lay overturned, and a long-dead console blinked sporadically with residual power. A cracked containment cylinder held the malfunctioning core he needed. He eased open the security latch, careful not to jostle the unstable glass too abruptly. The core emitted a faint hum, its energy rippling weakly. Hale inspected its internal conduits, confirming the structural weaknesses he'd suspected. A precise strike would rupture them. Not a catastrophic explosion, just enough force to create confusion and disarray. Enough to give him control. Footsteps approached outside, soft but coordinated. The specialists were closing in. Hale positioned the core along a narrow passage between two collapsed support beams. The confined space would amplify the shock. With practiced efficiency, he wiped away smudges of mud from his rifle scope and checked wind drift through a crack in the wall. Even inside the outpost, movement of air mattered. Everything mattered. The first specialist appeared at the entrance, shimmering through its partially active cloak. Hale crouched behind a stack of crates and waited. More shadows filtered in, each moving with predatory caution. They whispered updates into their comm channels, their voices sharp with renewed certainty. They believed they had him cornered. Hale steadied his breathing, letting their confidence settle like dust. When the third specialist stepped into the narrow corridor, Hale fired. The bullet struck the core with pinpoint accuracy. A burst of blue-white energy erupted, slamming into the corridor walls and hurling the nearest specialist backward. The others staggered, their cloaking fields flickering violently. Hale moved instantly, weaving through the confusion, using the broken architecture as cover. He fired once, dropping a specialist whose helmet had fractured from the shockwave. Another swung its weapon toward him, but Hale dubbed behind a splintered support beam and rolled into a firing stance, delivering a round that shattered the weapon's emitter. Sparks showered the floor, illuminating the chaos. The remaining specialist hesitated, torn between retreat and retaliation. Hale watched its eyes shift from fear to comprehension. It finally understood that brute superiority meant nothing without adaptability. Hale lowered his rifle slightly, not out of mercy, but to make the lesson unmistakable. The specialist turned and fled, scrambling through the entrance to warn its commanders. Silence settled after its departure, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Hale exhaled slowly and surveyed the ruin he'd orchestrated. The Concord would regroup, analyze, and strategize, but today they had felt something unfamiliar: doubt. He stepped out of the outpost and into the dense green maze beyond. The jungle welcomed him back with its humid breath. The war wasn't over, but he'd shifted its balance. As he faded into the foliage, he murmured to the empty air, "The weapon never made the warrior." Then he vanished, leaving only questions and fear behind.